Hi, I'm Dr. Randall Smith with Christian Travel Study Programs, and I'm sitting here in Istanbul today. The Topkapi Palace had lovely gardens with these fountains around it, and still today the Gülhane Park is a place where people can come from Istanbul and spend time with their children and hang out. It's an ancient city that was the city of New Rome, Constantine's city from the 4th century, Constantinople, today called Istanbul. And because of that, we go back to some of the early churches. Places like Hagia Sophia and places like Hagia Sophia, this incredible structure that's still left from the 6th century AD. We also spend some time in the ancient Hippodrome, looking at some of the monuments that were put up there by Theodosius. Interestingly enough, all related to ancient times in the Bible. We travel through the city, and it's a wonderful city. It's filled with life and teeming with people, but we spend some time looking at some of the antiquities of the city at the Archaeological Museum, and then go across town and stand in the Grand Bazaar with all of its colors and smells and sounds. This was where East met West, and so it's a fabulous place for us to understand how commerce worked in antiquity. Now, Istanbul is fascinating, but what we actually came to study were the 7 churches of Revelation 2 and 3. And in order to start those 7 churches, we're going to have to head south. So we go down along the Dardanelles and take a ferry across the Dardanelles, or the ancient Hellespont. Then we had to get on to our 7 churches. And we went to the incredible cities of Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamum, the city of Thyatira and Sardis and Philadelphia and Laodicea. These incredible cities that were so important to the biblical narrative. With each one of those cities, we picked out something that was super important for us to remember. These are exciting times, and when you're looking into Jesus' words, we're going to show you how being in the places will help you understand the narrative better. Join us as we go to the 7 churches of Asia Minor in today's modern Turkey. Today we're going to Sardis, a great ancient city, a powerful ancient city, and a city that was resting on the laurels of its reputation from former days, and the church, when Jesus wrote to them, was no longer active, thriving, and growing as much as it was counting on its past. Join us as we head to Sardis. We're doing 2 different time periods here. Sardis is an old kingdom, the Lydian kingdom, and I'll talk about it when we're on site. We're going to pass by some mint sites and gold plundering sites, and we're also going to go up to a very large temple, an archaic temple. Then we'll come back and do our period. I think it's just worth seeing, and a little story of King Croesus and a little bit of the Lydian Empire.
But I'd like to do something I generally do earlier at the beginning. There's a moment in time when the quill was getting dull, and the shaking hands of an old apostle are writing these words. The Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Let the one who hears say, "Come." Let the one who is thirsty come. Let the one who desires to take the water of life without cost. I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues that are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away his part from the tree of life and from the holy city which are written in the book. He who testifies to these things says, "Yes, I am coming quickly." Amen. Come, Lord Jesus. The grace of the Lord Jesus be with you all. Amen. And as John writes those words, he writes the final words by the power of the Spirit of God for the written word of God for all time and eternity. This old man is sitting there. He's fragile, and we know a lot about him, and there's some things we just don't know. But I think I'd like to make sure, and most of you have spent a great deal of time with the disciple John and the apostle John, and you know a great deal about him. But let's just make sure everyone's on the same page here, that we know that the John we're talking about, even though there are commentators that dispute this, no surprise, there are commentators that dispute everything, okay? This John, as far as I'm concerned, is the writer of the Gospel of John, and it's written sometime in the 80s. It's written very late, easily 25 to 30 years after the other Gospels. And John's Gospel is written for two groups of people. So the way I like to do this is divide the bus, okay? On this side over here, we have Messianic Jews. These are kosher kids that grow up, find Jesus as the answer to their promise of Messiah, and they are people who believe that a person is known by what he does. If you're a Middle Easterner, life is about what you do. On this side, there are pig-eating pagans that have found Jesus, okay? The Greek Christians, and they are first called Christians at Antioch, meaning these people are from outside of Jerusalem. They're not from the temple and the history of the Jewish people. These are Greeks and Romans that have come to Jesus. These are ham-eating pagans that found Jesus, still eat ham, but they love Jesus. This over here is a group of people that ham, that's not even food. How could we ever do that? Now the problem is that Greeks believe that a man is known from the philosophy that falls from his lips. So a man is known by what he says. But Hebrews believe a man is known by what he does. So the Gospel of John is evenly divided between 7 I am sayings, and who is that to reach? Pig-eating pagans that came to Jesus, a man is known by what he said. What did he claim he was? That would be a Greek question. Who did he claim to be? 7 I am sayings. And then equal to that are 7 I do miracles, because the Jewish group is going, I don't care what he said he was, I want to know what he did, because you know me by what I do. Let me underscore that theologically for just a moment. I have two educations. I have a Christian education and a Hebrew education. In my Christian education, I learned the following definition of God. God is a spirit being who possesses intellect, emotion, and will, who does things according to his own good pleasure, who therefore brings all things to pass by his active or permissive will in perfect harmony with his attributes. That's the Greek definition. That's the Western definition. When I went to a Hebrew school, it was God is a mountain with a cloud at the top. You can see the foot of the mountain, what he does, but you cannot see above the cloud who he is. And by the way, it's not even right to ask who he is inside the cloud. So the Hebrew mind does not try to make triangles and clover leaves and imagery. They're aniconic. The Greek mind wants an image for everything and an outline. And my point is, John is pastoring both groups. If you're in Ephesus in the 80s and you want to tell the story of Jesus, Matthew tells you the words of Jesus, meaning there's more red in the red letter edition of Matthew than any other gospel. Not really hard to, parse that one. Mark is euthos, the word immediately. He's all about the action. Right? And then immediately Jesus did this, and immediately he did that, and then immediately everybody else did this. And it was like it's this running film. Okay, so it's the actions or works. Luke is about chronology, and that's Luke 1:1-4. Many other people wrote things down, Theophilus, that Jesus said and did, like Matthew and Mark, but I'm going to set these things in order. That's chronology. And so when I did my first book was 38 years ago or something. When I did my first book, it was a harmony of the Gospels based on the chronology of Luke with the words of Matthew and the works of Mark. That's really what I was doing. Now, John is separated into a variety of feasts, and it looks like we get our 3-year understanding, 3.5-year understanding of Jesus' ministry from John's gospel because of the feast separation of the chronology of John. It's not that John is not chronological, it's that 90% of John's material is not in the synoptic gospels. So synoptic, same view, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John does not give you a retelling of the story because those are already existing in the churches. Rather, he goes and says, there's something you don't understand, and that is, if Jesus was so incredibly wonderful and popular, how did he end up on a cross? Well, he had a problem with the seminary in Jerusalem. And so they back tell that story. And in John's gospel, a third of that gospel is just the last night in which Jesus was betrayed, John 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, right? So it's divided a little differently. Okay, now John's gospel will be something that John writes, but he also writes 3 epistles. The most important thing you can know about John's epistle of 1 John, if you hear nothing else I say about 1 John, this is the thing you want to know. There is only one epistle in the New Testament, only one epistle that is written in the style of a legal brief. And it is 1 John. What does that mean? I don't know about all the states, but I know that many years I lived in Florida. And in Florida, when we make a law in Florida, the first third, often put at the end, but it's written in the beginning, the first third of a law are actually the definition of terms. So man bites dog. When we say man, we mean Homo sapiens sapien, male or female, and it defines exactly who it is. When we say dog, we mean canine, and it can be any one of the following, and so the law self-defines. Guys, when you're reading 1 John, the biggest mistake you can make is look for words and how they're used, even by John in other books. In a legal brief, all words are self-defined. So, for instance, John will say in 1 John, and if you read chapter 3, you'll come away with John will say in 1 John, sin equals lawlessness. The word lawlessness is anomia. It does not mean no rules. It means makes up his own. Sin is he who makes his own rules. Then later in the narrative, he will say, no man who follows Jesus sins. And what he's saying is, see definition of sin earlier in document. Don't go to Matthew to define sin. Don't go to Leviticus to define sin. It's a self-defined document. Is that clear? Does that make sense? So the problem with 1 John is it's badly read by people because they use the rest of the Bible, hamartia, the word sin. Well, it's used in this verse over here, and it's used. Don't do that in 1 John. It will blow up in your face. In 1 John, it's written in the format of a Roman legal document that is self-defining. So look for every time he says this is this. Love is this. When he tells you what it is, that's the definition. Put a box around it in the narrative. I teach all my students to do this. Put a box around it in the narrative, and then everywhere else in the book, refer back to that definition. And when you fill it in, if I say to people, no one who follows Jesus sins, they're offended. But if I say, look, the fundamental definition of a Christian is this. If you follow Jesus, you don't make up your own rules. I have just spoken faithfully 1 John, and that's what he was trying to say. No one who follows Jesus truly makes up his own rules. That's the basis upon which I can set sexual standards. It's not up to me. I don't write them. I follow something written by someone else. And God has already spoken, and no one who follows Jesus has the entitlement to make up their own rules. Does that make sense? So 1 John is really important to be read in a certain way. If you want to do more on that, we can do more on that later, and I'm happy to do that. But the book of 1 John, at least 2 chapters of it are almost undiscernible if you do not know that one piece of information. Okay? 2 John and 3 John are all about who you should allow speaking in your assembly and what are some of the problems with leadership in the first century. Because everything rises and falls on leadership, and already there were people who were trying to be leaders who shouldn't have been leaders. And there were people who were trying to preach in the assembly who shouldn't be allowed to preach in the assembly. And so you're going to have Gaius and Demetrius and some names of people that are going to be commended or should be ashamed. And that's 2nd and 3rd John. And then, of course, in addition to the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, you have the 5th book of John, which is the book of the revelation of Jesus Christ. Remember that it's not just a revelation of things that will come to pass. It's a revelation of Jesus Christ and things that will come to pass. And if throughout the things that will come to pass you do not highlight who Christ is, you have missed the message John was given. Again, John goes back to his method of sevens, and I find 7 sevens in Revelation. So you have 7 churches, right? But you also have in 4 and 5 7 personages that are given of who's in the throne room. Now, I'm not saying there's only 7 there. I'm saying he highlighted 7 because he likes the 7s and he's doing a 7s thing. And I'm saying how many seals are there? 7. How many trumpets are there? 7. How many bowls? 7. And in point of fact, did you ever go like to July 4th and watch them fire off fireworks and they break up? And then one of them goes off and breaks up again, and then one of them goes off and breaks up again. That's how it's written. So there's 6 seals, and the 7th seal breaks up into 6 trumpets, and the 7th trumpet breaks up into 7 bowls or vials. So it's kind of 3 sets of 7. He loves the 7s, okay? And it's a lot of fun to kind of identify all of his 7s being a number of completion in the Bible. So he's trying to tell you the end story, so he has 7 sevens to say it's a done deal. And that's how you're supposed to walk away from it. Lots of things we know about John. If you want to explore any of those, we can do more of them, but I just wanted to, while I had you awake at the beginning, I wanted to just kind of throw those out, okay? We're going to take a look at a temple that had massive columns. If you've seen the Parthenon in Rome, sometimes I have people grab hands and stand around. It's one of those ones where you can take 4 or 5 people, I think it's 5 people around the columns here. It was huge, huge temple. Larger than the Parthenon in Athens was this temple. Now, it's not as well restored as the Parthenon in Athens, but it was a larger temple. So it's an impressive Sardian ruin. Sardis comes from the word for Sardian stone. It's a deep, brownish, reddish stone that when held to the light has flecks of red in it, deep red, Sardian stone. It's mentioned even in Revelation as a stone that's at the throne room of heaven. When we talk about money, Sardis is what's on the lips of an ancient because it's equivalent with the birth of money. The beginning of money is here. The very first money is made here. You're looking at the first mint in human history. Okay? So here's the plan. We're going to step off, then we'll gather at a sign. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the background of the Lydian kingdom because it might not be one of those ones that's accessible to you. And once you hear it and set it into biblical time frame, it's fairly easy to understand.
Some of you may be familiar with the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, the Artemisian. And if you've ever preached anything from the letter to the Ephesians, you know that it was a world-class site, the Artemisian. There's another contemporary temple that was here. The temple in Ephesus was sponsored by the kings of this place. And so it was known as a world-class temple, one of the wonders of the world. This was not known as one of the wonders of the world, but it's contemporary to it and large like it and incredibly powerful. 1200 BCE to 547 BCE is the Lydian kingdom. That means from the period basically of the rise of the kingdom in Israel all the way through the end of the captivity in the Babylonian captivity, that period 1200 BC to 547, that's the period of the Lydian kingdom. If you lived in what is today Turkey or Anatolia, the Lydians were your masters during much of that period or part of that period. Why? They founded something they called money. And they didn't make it of gold. They made it of an amalgam called electron. An electron, they came up with this incredible thing where not only they would have weights of electron that had a specific value, but the king would put his stamp on it. And the first stamp on coin was found from here. And he would guarantee the amount of electron, and it became so widely traded that other countries got on board. When the Persians came here under Cyrus the Mede, when the Medo-Persian king came here and defeated King Croesus, he took back much of that idea of money. Money became pervasive. Basically, from the end of the Old Testament period, everybody starts using money. But it started here, ground zero at Sardis, okay? One of the things I want you to know about Sardis, the picture I have is laurels. Someone who's standing on their laurels. This is all about, we have been great. Some of you have been to this church that once was 2,000, now is 600, but all their talk was, to use Springsteen's term, the glory days. They're always looking back to the glory. I remember when this church was so full that we just had people sitting out in the aisles, and they are living the day that isn't anymore. Sardis is going to be the church that's sitting on its laurels, talking about what it used to be. They had a reputation, they just didn't have a reality. We're going to do that at the other site. Here I want to talk about this temple. Artemis, as you know, was the goddess of the wilderness and of the huntress, the great huntress, but she's also the protector of little girls. Apollon, her brother, is the protector of little boys. So she's fairly popular in families during the Greco-Roman period. When you look around, do you see geologically that these hills are different than the ones you've seen? These are not solid stone, solid rock hills. They're alluvial hills. That is, they're hills that were pushed up as ancient seabeds, and they become actual movable soil. And so you can see that around here, that this is a different soil, and it's a lighter soil. The bed of the river down here gave flecks of gold, and so they were able to mine this, and early on in the kingdom, this became very, very important. It made them incredibly wealthy. And then they became not only expansionists, but then they became patrons. So many things we're going to see, we're going to say the Lydians built this, or this was from the Lydian kingdom. Their chief king that we talk about most of all was King Croesus. Now, if I said it in Greek, it'd be Croesus, and it's written Croessus. Croesus or Croesus, I use the British one because that's what most Americans do. Croesus, we know all about him. We know that he had an impregnable site here, and that all the way up on the ridge line is part of his upper city. The Lydians had their own style of music that when played in Athens is called Lydian tone music. So imagine he's sitting up here, Croesus, and they're picking the harp, the sitar, and they have the harp going ding, 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 and they have that kind of sultry tunes of the Lydians. And they're eating sherbet. The earliest find of sherbet is found from here. We have a writing that they had a strange combination of the snow of the mountains with the local fruits. And so they give us a number of things. This is a very wealthy culture that comes to a very startling stop when Cyrus the Mede comes here, and there is a time when it looks like the Lydians are surrounded by the Persians who have made their way all the way out here. And by the way, if you make a straight shot out of Persia, you'll end up here on your way to places like Pergamum and places on the coast. This whole thing hinged on one simple event. This was a very well fortified kingdom. And if you go up there, sadly, Croesus's kingdom after the fall of Croesus in 547 has been looted more than any other archaeological site. Why? Because he was the guy that antiquity remembers as the father of gold. So who knew that people would rob his site? Okay? Croesus was like, when you mention him in ancient sources, it would be Mr. Money. Okay? In 547, the Persians come up, and Croesus is not worried. He has very good fortifications. He's got a very good spot, and he's got around him a fortress wall. I can only show you a few pieces of it left that haven't been plundered, but the wall itself was pretty impregnable, and he felt like he was just not touchable. And the problem with the site was the site goes up to one side and then drops off. So they had a wall line that went up part way, but actually didn't have a wall at the peak. They didn't need one. And the wall, when it came down the front of the slope here, over behind the trees here, and wrapped around and went back upward, that wall was a very, very big wall. The story is told, and Herodotus passes the story later, that there was a soldier out one night. The Persians were encamped around, and the soldier lost his helmet. It blew off of his head and went over the wall. There was at the bottom of the wall a large rampart or glacis to stop anyone from using a battering ram. According to the story, a guy popped out of the middle of the glacis in a little window, grabbed his helmet, closed the glacis, and went back up on the roof, thus exposing how to get in from down below. And Croesus's kingdom falls. This powerful, impregnable kingdom. So I just want you to take a look at this temple. This isn't our time period. It's well before, it's 500 years before our time period, but it's way cool to see. There's an old story about Croesus, the king here, that he consulted the Delphic oracle. Now, you know the oracles often gave some kind of shady language. You could never tell what they really meant. It's kind of like stock advisors and weathermen today. The oracle, he said, went to and said, should I go up and fight Cyrus? And the oracle said, the one who crosses the Halys River, when this happens, a great kingdom will fall. Croesus then, of course, assaulted the Persians, and he lost, and a great kingdom did fall, his. But it was not, the way they speak, they can always speak, well, a great kingdom will fall. Well, one way or the other, that's going to be true. Just to be clear, the temple that you saw was one of the seven largest Hellenistic temples, built in the 300s BC, continued for 1,000 years till about the 700s AD, but not without major changes and additions. 17 AD is the date of the great earthquake here. And Tiberius is Caesar, and he gives a lot of money to clean up the mess and to rebuild the temple. So that temple that you saw was 300 BC, but rebuilt under the Romans, a Greek temple rebuilt by Romans with Roman money, because it's good to be a Roman, sponsored by your emperor. What I want to do here is just take a look at some civic locations for a gymnasium and bath complex and some side rooms that go with it that later became used as a synagogue, funny enough. Gymnasium is the word for in the nude. And it's basically for the participation of the baths and the wrestling and the various things that happen around it. Remember that in the Roman period, in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries, doctors didn't have offices. They were at a public bath. Usually an apothecary was at a public bath. Your lawyer didn't have an office. He didn't hang out a shingle anywhere. He met you at the public baths. So bathing was everything. Normally, if you're a person of station, let's say you're a paterfamilias, a father of a family, and you've got a fair-sized estate, what you're going to do is you're going to get up in the morning, and before you get up, the first thing you do is sit up on the edge of your your bed, and you begin to recount your dreams, because Romans had the strong belief that a lot of things could be known about their day ahead by their dreams. After you did that, you might come down, wash off your feet, put on your sandals, put on your toga, come down to or come into out of your cubiculum. By the way, your wife is probably sleeping in another room. That's very, very normal. There's a second floor to many villas. They're the gynoeceum, where the girls all go up and put color on each other's fingernails, or I don't know what they do because now I've never been up there. But the men are down below. And so he'll get up and he'll come out, and it'll be just before sunrise. Typically, he'll come out to the front of his house, and the villa is structured so that the first half of the house is public space. The second half of the house is private space. The atrium that's open to the sky and the porches around it can be accessed by people who are clientes, clients. They will normally be sitting on benches on the outside of the building. He'll open the front door and he'll put next to it some big Nubian guard. If he's a man of wealth, you want a Nubian because he's really imposing. And by the way, the slave that is your door guard, it's kind of like Wile E. Coyote. I'm serious. He comes out in the morning, he undoes the band, puts the metal band around him, puts the lock on it, puts the key up on the shelf, and then stands there locked to the chain. At the end of the time, like Wile E. Coyote, he will unlock himself and go to lunch, okay? It's not the kind of slavery you think it is. Doormen can actually be quite intelligent now and be elevated to become teachers, all kinds of things. If you're a Roman, you don't respect the Greeks as warriors because you took them over, but you love their art, you love their cooks. When I was a kid, there used to be a television show about some kids that were being raised by a wealthy man who had a butler. I can't remember the name of the show, but the butler was British. So the British posh, speaking, that's kind of how Romans felt about Greeks. They had an accent and they cooked well. And by the way, their art was really good. So you would normally in the morning, you'd come out and greet your clients, and you would light behind you on the wall of the family office the candles underneath the faces of your ancestors. And you would stand in front of what looks like a cloud of witnesses. And you would tell people about, in the name of my family, what is it you need? And you would do your business there. But by midday, you're heading to the public bath. And you're going to spend probably 3 to 4 hours of your day in the public bath. It's not all sitting in a bathtub, okay? Most of it has to do with, there's a caldarium, tepidarium, frigidarium, hot, tepid, cold, and cold means room temperature. But there's also sauna works there. There's also olive oil rub downs. There's massages. There's also wrestling. There's also lectures given by out-of-towners who drop by. You can have, and if it gets to be late in the afternoon, you can even start with a symposium. A symposium basically is where everybody drinks and gets smarter as they drink, okay? And so they're having a discussion with wine in their hand. If it goes to a house, it's called a convivium. But we're going to take a look at some of the public. It's good to be a Roman. This is sponsored by your local mayor. So I want you to imagine that Mark here wants to be mayor of town. So here's what he's going to do. Mark is going to book out 5 days this week of paying for your toilet. So when you come by the way, you don't use the toilets for urination. Urination is done on city street corners in buckets with cleaners' names on it. Joe's Cleaners, because that's his bucket. So you pee in that bucket, and that's going to go to Joe's Cleaners because that's what you do laundry in. The ammonias from the urine is what they're stomping your togas with. At any rate, and until the time of Vespasian, you didn't pay a tax, but later they taxed even pee because the Romans were brutal on these things. But the important thing is you use the toilet for defecation purposes. But let's say you really have to go, you're going to come and they're going to get a ticket to go in, and you're even going to supply the big dauber that acts like a Q-tip for toilet paper, and it's all sponsored by Mark. Mark, he's here when you need him. Vote Mark at the next election. He's going to cover toilets, but it might be a theater presentation. It might even be your bath. So let's take a walk. These are shops, and they're from a later period, from about the 400s to the 700s, the Byzantine period. The shops themselves have in the walls piping that's taking the water from off the flat roof and bringing the water down into the cistern underneath. Can you see a piece of the terracotta pipe? You would not have seen that. That would be sealed behind the wall. You're not seeing the frescoes, but if you walk through, you'll even see here secondary use. A column from earlier was stuck sideways to build that wall. They didn't stand on ceremony. They'd take something that was a really important piece of stone from 500 years before. It's laying around. I need a piece, shove it in here and build the wall. So this is a shop. Most every shop has a threshold. The threshold gets its name because in homes on the floor for carpet was thresh. Thresh is a weed that grows. So the holder of the thresh that stops it from falling out is your threshold, okay? But here you can see there are pins in the outside and here pins on the inside. This is for a door. There's the hinge, and when they built it, you build the door and actually put the lintel above it and lock the door in place. So you build it, drop the door in, and then put the top on. So in order to change doors, you have to disassemble the wall and pop the lintel, right? Here, there was also a barrier or showing that this was a shop that could have the doors open but the barrier down so that you wouldn't be able to come in. Sometime in the 2nd century, someone built a site here, built a room, and reused some stone from a previous period, and then that got redesigned even later, and sometime in the 4th century they used some stone here even with crosses on it. What this is a dyer's shop. And why we know that it's a dyer's shop had to do with the small finds of what was found in here, the pottery that had deep-seated inked dyes seeping into the pots themselves. And they were of a variety of colors, and that's unusual, and so they know that this is a dyer's shop. That's kind of cool because you saw Thyatira earlier, and we talked about a certain kind of dye there. But dyed fabric is all the rage in the Roman and Byzantine period. In the Byzantine shops, some of your best, look, they didn't have lots of different kinds of stores because they didn't have lots of different kinds of stuff. I would remind you that in the Bible, we go in and we find these homes, but what we don't find in them is closets. Why? Because you don't need one. A change of raiment means you're wealthy. Now, most of us live with lots of changes of raiment, right? But these dyes would be, the difference is I can wear the red one or the blue one, but I have a red and blue one, and that makes me special. By the way, all Roman men wore a toga virilis, Byzantine men as well. That was exactly the same. And if you were part of the working class, you wore a tunic. Tunic is a simple garb. A toga goes to the floor and is as many as 45 feet of cloth is wrapped around your arm, and you hold it under one arm. So how do you work? You don't. That's the point. You're a toga wearer because you don't work. The word for a workroom or sales place is taverna. We get the word tavern from it, but tavern denotes a pub. These taverna are simple workrooms. They can be any kind of craft and it's still a taverna. However, if it's a popine, it's a pub or a restaurant, and I'm standing in a popine. That's the Latin term, and we would get the idea of people having more or less a snack bar here. It is a restaurant, but notice it's not a big one. It's not a lot of people sitting around here. This is one of those things where they're not spending a great deal of time in these kinds of places. So think snack bar, stop by, and they're going to be associated with baths, gymnasiums, or worship centers. Why? Because after worship people eat, at baths people order into the bath and eat, and of course whenever you have any kind of public theater or anything like that, look for the popini or the snack bars. One of the striking things they found here is a 12-meter wide street. Now you're not really able to see much of it, but I'm standing on the edge of the street. The street is down here. The street crowns and goes here. And on both sides of the street there's a stylobate and a series of columns. And you would see like you saw earlier today in Thyatira, you'd see like a kind of an arcade. Behind that, where you're standing on the walking street. Now in most Roman towns, you don't stand down here because the carts come down here and everything the oxen leave behind is right where I am. okay? You're walking along up there and it's a covered walkway. But to find the entire street is actually quite rare today. They're all over the place in the Roman world, but it takes a lot of real estate just to dig it up and show that there's a street. But these are in fact Roman and Byzantine. They come from the Hellenistic period through the Roman period all the way into the Byzantine period. So I'm now back on the walking street. Most of these areas are domestic spaces with shops below. Here's the paint shop over this side. I just want you to notice as you go by here, there's a set of steps going up, so there is a second floor here. And most often the set of steps will go up to a landing and then a straight up ladder. So I'm standing down here. It's difficult for us to know whether this is the residence or the shop beneath it, but very often you'd have a simple structure like this where I'm selling out on the porch and I'm coming in, but this is my own domestic space as well. So my shop becomes my home. For some people who have even a little bit better situation, they have their home upstairs and their shop downstairs, and that continues into Europe all the way between 400 and 1400. That's just the way it's done, right? So you live and work in the same space. Stop and think for a minute. Most people in antiquity, till the time of the Renaissance in the 16th century, middle 1500s, most people in history were born, lived, and died within 25 miles. And so remember that people in antiquity, I mean, they're in decent shape, and honestly, you're eating pretty much a vegetarian diet. Your average 5'2" based on their burials, between 100 and 300 in this region of the world. 5'2", average lifespan 42 years. I just want you to notice as you go by, if you look down in the pit, you can see that there's a stairway up to a monumental building here that existed before the 17 AD earthquake. It's buried underneath what you're going to see. The problem with digging up that building, it'll be cool, but we have to ruin this building to get to it. The walls here are restored. Here's what we know. We know who put the original bricks there because bricks are stamped. And so we know if something is done at the time of Emperor Tiberius, it'll have a Tiberius stamp on it, or it'll have a stamp of a company contemporary to Tiberius. So a lot of times that's how you do it. So you've got the red brick. This is classic Roman Byzantine structure. Red brick with the stone between it with lime plaster and concrete inside it. And that makes it incredibly resistant to earthquakes. And that's going to tell you, what did they have on their mind when they built that? There was just an earthquake. So what are we going to use? We're not going to use solid stone. We're going to use the red and we're going to use the field stone, and that's going to allow it to flex. Now, look under your feet, and what you're going to see in Greek is the entry point, a vestibule of a building, and the building itself will have a dedication for it. And if you look at it, what these are the tesserae, are little pieces of geological stone in different colors inserted into a bed of plaster and literally just rolled over and allowed to settle. And those become mosaic floors. They're stylistically changed from time to time, but they are absolutely wonderful. And it's helpful when they actually tell you who puts the floor down, what do they put it down for, that kind of thing. We're going to go into a building that's very important, so you should get the feel that this ended here, had a set of steps, went right up in here, came to the threshold, came down inside. There was another mosaic, only pieces of it here, and you're coming into a mosaic room, and then you come to another mosaic tiled room. We're standing inside the atrium and outer porches of a synagogue. And what's interesting is the format of these buildings is identical to the format of a villa. So I told you that if you lived in a villa, the front part was open to the sky, an atrium where an impluvium came down and the rain went down into the compluvium down below. By the way, if it was a home at the front door, there would be a couch inside the front door, a kline, right? Do you remember in Hebrews 12, the marriage bed is undefiled? That is a lectus. It's actually a bed that sits inside the front door. It's not used by anybody. It's like it's as useful as a wedding ring. It's there to say that there's a marriage in this home and there is a mama in this home and she's got teeth. Get your eyes off my man. That's what that's for, okay? So you come inside, and now inside you're going to have, this would be open to the sky. So here it would be open to the sky, but we're coming in as people coming to a public building here. If this were a private building, the office of the home would be at the back of this porch here, and that would be called the tablinum or tablinum. So our death masks of our ancestors in a home would go on the wall here. This is a public building, it's not for that, but it's the exact same shape, it's just larger. And what's important is that this is the boundary in a home between public space and private space. Okay? For this, we are now leaving the vestibule. By the way, in a home, the shrine that has the home fires burning, the Vesta shrine, would be right there. It'd be at the outside of the atrium. What is the word for that shrine? The Vesta shrine. The Latin word is focus. The focus of the home is on the shrine in the outer part of the home. So you focus on it. Keeping the home fires burning, this all comes from here. Before a man goes on a journey, he takes the fires off of that and goes out on the journey, taking coals from the home altar to keep the home fires burning is what a good wife does. Okay? These all come from ancient Rome. So come on inside here. I want you to see these areas, this and this. There are at least 5 different styles of artistry done here. Sometimes they're using inscribed stone and pieces of these stones. It's not that some of it's done and some of it's not. It's that some of it's original and some of it's reconstruction. So they're trying to show you what it would have looked like and insert the pieces from the original without having all the pieces of the original. Does that make sense? Now, in Judaism, you always have the archisolia, or the scrolls of the law of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the scrolls of the Torah, and they're always behind 2 things. They're behind a wood door and a curtain. Think about that in church history, because in the Catholic Church, if you go and see the elements of the Mass, they're in the sacristy, which is behind a wood door and a curtain. Where did it come from? They borrowed it out of the synagogue and brought it into the church. Guys, bear in mind that for Jewish people, all around the world, they have a synagogue. Now, we're not talking about the Old Testament, we're talking about New Testament period Jews. There is no synagogue in the Old Testament. During the time in Babylon, when displaced from the land, the rabbis came up with a way of keeping the academies of Judaism going, and they created places where you could sit and learn. The first time you see them in the text is the second half of Ezra. As you know, Ezra is the first 6 chapters is the scroll of Zerubbabel. The last 7 through 10 are actually of Ezra, and that's 50 years later. But Ezra comes and reads from the law and gives the sense. What's the problem? The problem is the people now speak Aramaic, the scrolls are in Hebrew, and somebody's got to interpret. And that's the beginning. May we all just stop and say that's the beginning of a sermon. Oh. Okay, but beyond that, I've got a group of pastors, so that makes sense. But beyond that, the synagogue becomes a learning center. There's only one of these in the Jewish world, only one anywhere in the Jewish world, and it doesn't deal with learning, it deals with sin. What building am I speaking of? Where is sin dealt with? The temple. There's only one temple. And that has to do with you intersecting God and dealing with your heart and dealing with sin. But there are many, many of these synagogues. And the synagogues are not about dealing with sin, they're about learning about God. Now I want you to see it this way. The Catholicism picked up the temple side of Judaism. In Catholicism, you go to the Mass, and it's not about the learning, it's about the dealing. There's smoke, incense, there's an altar, there's death, resurrection to new life, but it's all about sin. I'm not saying you don't learn anything. I'm saying that's not its focus. Protestantism picked up the synagogue side of Judaism. What's the synagogue side? It's about the debate over the scriptures and about learning, and people saying, that's not what verse 7 means. Oh, I can't believe that you would say such a thing. That's synagogue. So this is the forerunner of where the church gets its bed. Can I just make the argument that synagogue and church both, synagogue and temple both need each other? And churches of both types need each other. And I get concerned because I can go into some cathedrals and I'll stand when they stand, sit when they sit, kneel when they kneel, but I won't learn anything. The problem is, in my style of church, we saunter into the gymnatorium, coffee cup in hand, to worship the living God, and something's missing. We don't have a sense of reverence, okay? These are not places of reverence. This is actually a place that could be used for any kind of group hall meeting, okay? So let's come down and take a look. By the way, did you notice that there are these big seats here? In antiquity, they were smart about how they laid out the building. So the focus of the building is often on the people who are speaking inside the front door. In this one, it's very likely a pedestal that was here, and so the chief seats of these synagogues would be back by the door. That means if you walk in late, everybody's looking at you. Okay, the best way to get people here on time is to make everybody look at the door, okay? So be careful of the intrusion here. There would have been a kind of a tent-like structure that could be put up here. If you've ever been to an Orthodox wedding, you would understand exactly what that's for. It's a chuppah. The chuppah is something you put up, and so standing underneath. Have you ever seen a Jewish wedding where they like break a glass and all that? Okay, that's what this area is for, but it's not always there. The problem is you can always trip over it. Now what's interesting to me is, you remember that we saw in Aya Arene a synthronon, the area that looks like a choir loft. When you're looking at Judaism today, you're not looking at Judaism as it was in the New Testament or as it was at the time of King David. Things are developmental. But by the way, when you're looking at Christianity today, you're not looking at, we do it the way they did it in the New Testament. No, we don't. Not for nothing, but New Testament baptism was done in the nude. What are you guys doing? Okay? I'm just saying, everybody's adapted some things. Okay? Here's what's ironic about this place. It was, at one time, a bath complex for nudity bought up by a local synagogue, which is like totally not about that, okay? So it's a nice adaptation. Let's keep going because I want you to see the rest of the site. Okay, so now you're looking at a Byzantine period, so put 300 to 600 roughly on it for the finished product. But I just want to stop and say something to you, for those of you who are doing Bible things. There are scholars that suggest that Jews arrived at Sardis, because we were looking at their synagogue here, in the 6th century BC. And it's suggested in Obadiah 20 that there's going to be, something, but Sardis is called in its Semitic name Sepharad. So some of you found passages where it mentions Sepharad, like in Obadiah, and you don't know where that is. Some scholars put it here, okay? And because it is an appropriate interpretation of the name. Some people put it as far away as Spain, but it doesn't have to be. There's a major kingdom here. And so it looks like Jews are already coming here. And I'm using the one based on Josephus's Antiquities 14. He seems to think it's here. So just for you to know, you can kind of have a mental picture because you're going to trip across Sepharad. This is, by the way, the largest single synagogue from antiquity that we have. That's the largest one. And what's interesting to me, it was originally part of the bath complex that was here before it. So apparently some Jews lived in town and thought, bath complex, bunch of nude guys, that'd be a great place to build our synagogue. And they come and they buy up the property. It doesn't mean they stop using the property as a bath complex, because the rest of this is also operating. It means perhaps the town council realizes they built too much and they can pick up a piece of property and turn it into a synagogue. Play it out the way we would for a local church. Let's go take a look at the apses. The fellow who's worked here is named Nick Cahill. He's from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So he's the chief architect of what you see having been done here. He was the director of the expedition to Sardis, and he worked since 1979 till now. It is still ongoing. This is part of a bath complex. I want you to stop. First of all, we know something about this place because it actually came with a number of writings on it. It has a dedication to Caracalla, so 200s AD. You're standing in the main hall of a 200s AD bath complex, okay? Imagine that there would be big areas over top. Some areas are open to the sky, some areas are closed, so the next room over there would be entirely closed. Remember that these large halls have in them everything from places to go for an apothecary to things to read, magazine stands, popine, all kinds of things that you can get for your pleasure. And you can tell the temperature of what a bathroom is, a room for a bath is, by if you go down into the ground like back there, it'll be a cool pool. Because you like a wine cellar, it has to be cool, you go down into it. If it's on stacks of what look like donuts, the floor is elevated and a Hypocauste system is pumping hot air underneath of it, it's hot. If it's on the level with a bathtub, usually something that's copper or bronze, because it distributes the temperature, it's going to be a tepidarium. This is the main heart of town if you're at 200 AD. Okay? I'm stopping you here because I want to stop and take a look for a moment at the letter. And I want you to think about this incredible site that has this great past. Sardis is a place with a past. Here's what the letter to Sardis said. And to the angel of the church in Sardis write, these things says he who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your works, that you have a name, that you are alive, but you are dead. He says, be watchful, strengthen the things which remain, that are ready to die, for I have not found your works perfect before God. Remember therefore how you have received and heard, hold fast and repent. Therefore, if you will not watch, I will come upon you as a thief, and you will not know what hour I have come upon you. You have a few names, even in Sardis, who have not defiled their garments. And they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Now think about this place and what you've seen so far, because we're going to leave soon, and I just want you to take a moment and think about what you've seen. You've seen a great kingdom. Croesus and the Lydians had a great kingdom. It was collapsed on top of them. It died. One of the things you noticed is that by the New Testament period, you've come upon a place that continues to be a Roman place, a Roman center, quite a bit of wealth. Their public buildings are pretty impressive, and that's going to happen all the way from the 2nd and 3rd and 4th centuries up to the synagogue is used up until the 600s. So you've got a place that had significant wealth. It's also the place with the largest synagogue in the world that we find outside of Eretz Israel, outside of Israel. And what's interesting is it's into a world like this, with all of the luxury and wealth, that Christianity first entered. It's interesting because they came into the Roman world when Attalus III deeded the city over to Rome. Rome didn't have to conquer the city. It was written into somebody's will. But when they took it, they took the wealth, they took the banks, they took the Pactolus River and the gold. All of this became a wonderful place. Listen, if you're a Roman and you're a provincial ruler, this is a plum. You want to rule here. It's got a lot of money, a lot of great fruits and vegetables, lots of great clothing. This is a center for all of that. It's an extremely important province. It's one of the richest, and it's the political plum. But it's also a center since the Lydian period all the way through the Hellenistic period. It's a hotbed center for gods and goddesses. Now, I was talking to you about this reputation of Sardis. And did you notice that Jesus says some things to them in his letter? He says, it's written from the one who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. It's interesting. This was the banking capital of the 7 churches. The banking capital was here. It's by the way, this would have been Switzerland. This has been where everybody's central bank was, okay? So imagine that you're in a place where you have this incredible central bank, and he says, I am the one who holds all 7 churches. You might hold their markers, their notes, and their banking, but I'm the one who holds the whole operation. Jesus reminds them of who, in fact, he is. But I love that he also says something to them. He says, there are a few of you who have not defiled your garments. Remember that when you get your laundry done, you're in a bath. You get your clothes clean when you get you clean. So the way they do that is you have a person who comes with you. If you're a person who's like a paterfamilias of a family, a father of a family, you bring one of your slaves with you and they carry your coats. This is the word used of Paul when at the stoning of Stephen, the guy who carries the coats that comes into the bath. You send your guys with your cloak, you take off your toga, and you're going to send it out. And what they're going to do is take it to the local cleaners, and they're going to drop it into a vat of urine that has been collected on the corners all over town. Okay? There's going to be a slave whose job it is to stand there and be the plunger. And so he stands in the urine all day. No word on what he does at night, but nevertheless, he stands there all day long, and then they take this out. Now, they're not going to just put it in the ammonia of urine and then put it back on you, okay? So what happens is they're going to put it then into a water wash, and then they're going to agitate it in a water wash. Then they're going to move it to another wash that has usually some kind of fragrance like rose water in it, something that will make it, kind of dull the urine smell, tamp that down. And then after that, when they get it done, have you ever seen these quick erecting tents that you buy that are dome tents? You know what I'm talking about? They would make an igloo of sticks that look like a dome tent and put your cloth over top of it and then take sulfur in blocks and light it underneath. And the sulfur would smoke terribly up through the cloth, but it would turn your toga virilis, your toga, it would turn it white. And anything that you had that was a stain in it, the guy would be sitting there rubbing out all of your stains. Defiled garments were what came into the cleaners. What goes out are clean garments, right? By the way, after the sulfur, you don't have to worry about the smell of the urine. The sulfur's worse. At that point, what you do is you put it back into the rose water, then you hang it back up. How many of you think that sounds like it's going to take a few hours? It is, but you got a few hours and you're spending it at the bath. I love to go, in Malta, there is a tomb that if you stand next to this tomb, it says, I miss our wine and baths together. It's not written by a guy to his lover, it's written by a guy to his lawyer. They spent so long talking about his financial and his legal situation at the baths that he really missed the guy when he was gone and sent the nice inscription. At any rate, did you notice what he says to the church? He says, you have a name, but you are dead. That's why I gave you laurels. This is a church that's living on a reputation. Guys, think about it. Every great liberal seminary that you know started off not liberal. Every great institution that utterly rejects the Bible as God's word, most all of them started off being actually very strong Bible-believing Christians. And I find it interesting that over time, people adopt by compromise, and then eventually they live on. Guys, right now, there are people in your churches that are writing checks to institutions that are not following Jesus, but used to, but still have the reputation. You can show up in seminaries, and if you get to know what's going on there, you'll know they're not what they were when you were in school. Things are changing fast. We all agree? Things are changing rapidly, and what's happening is people are living off their reputation. What Jesus said to them was, be watchful. I'm always mindful that Croesus had his capital of Lydia here, and that whole story with the oracle, it's almost like Cyrus took the city while people slept in arrogant pride, and now Jesus says, by the way, with your history in Sardis, you might want to stay watchful and stay awake. I think that he calls on them to strengthen what remains, and I think probably right now we've just gone through a period of COVID of wake up. There's actually been a time. Many of us are finding that our churches weren't as strong as we thought they were. We're finding that the people we thought that were the cornerstone people, they're not. We're finding that people that really have a hunger for God are emerging, and new people are coming and taking their places. I actually think it's an exciting time to be in ministry. I do. I'm just saying it's a little bit painful. That's all. So he says to them, a few of you are going to walk in white. By the way, the white class of toga was not the same as the toga virilis. A white class of toga is a class for the ruling class of a city. The bouleuterian or town council wore a lighter garment than everyone else. So they sort of sparkle when they walk by, okay? And what I want you to see is, Jesus said, there's a few people that I'm going to confess before God and my angels. Let me stop and wrap this up and say one simple thing here. You can live off of a vibrant walk with Jesus, or you can live off of a reputation where you used to have one. And one of the greatest dangers in ministry today is trafficking in unlived truth. And I'm telling you, the longer you walk with Jesus and the longer you serve in ministry, the more you're going to be tempted to live on yesterday's spiritual growth. It's fairly easy to phone it in. It's fairly easy to phone it in. And frankly, most of you are in churches where you don't have anyone who's mature enough to actually gauge whether you're doing well. And that's why pastoral ministry becomes a dangerous rapids ride. For a lot of us, we spent a lot of our ministry unaccountable. If the truth were told, we were unaccountable. There were very few people that knew whether or not I was walking with God at all. And there were times I was, and there were times I wasn't. Personally, let me just say that the Lord always had a certain way of dealing with me. People always came to Christ in our ministry just at the time of my low point spiritually. Now everybody's going to try to calculate when those were. But often when I would find myself at my weakest, that's when Jesus would show up, right? And it was kind of a smack. I want you to just stop and think about the people who are living off their reputation. And then I want you to stop and say to yourself, look at that building, let it stamp you, that you can have the big building in town. You can have the cool buses and all the electronics. But you can be absolutely empty, phoning it in and living off of yesterday's growth. And this place, this bath complex and gymnasium, I want you to think about where you are in the spiritual gym of what you're doing. And I want you to think of this place with a laurel, something that they would put on your head when you did well, but something you would put on your wall and claim that you were someone great long after your body no longer looked like it did when you competed in that contest. There's a lot of us spiritually doing that. So Sardis, sometimes called the church of deadness because he says you are dead. To me, it's living on the laurels of yesterday's reputation. Thanks for visiting with us in Sardis. What an exciting time it's been to look at these powerful ruins of an ancient temple and to see a gymnasium and synagogue. But it reminds us that we cannot live on the reputation of yesterday. We must walk with the Lord today. Join us next time as we continue exploring the lands of the Bible.